I could hire 100 like you before Mike Elmer's. Constance Reeve closed the rent book and set it down on the corner of his desk and said, "Then you had better begin, your grace. I shall be gone by Thursday." Thaddeus, Duke of Orleston, heard the door shut behind her and discovered that the room had got very quiet. "Well," said his cousin Liesl from the window with a small delighted laugh, "that is servants for you." It had begun over timber. Lael had brought a man out from town, a Mr. Kroll, all watch chain and good humour, with an offer for the standing oak in Farrow Wood, £4,000 paid down, cash on the nail for the lot. Thaddeus had wanted it. He had wanted it very much, because the Orleston roof lead was going, and his father had left him a great deal of dignity and not much else, and £4,000 paid down is a warm and simple thing to a man with a cold house. He had rung for the housekeeper because the tally of the wood was in her keeping, as everything at Orleston was in her keeping, and she had come in with the book under her arm and stood at the end of the desk in her grey stuff gown with her hands folded. And when Kroll had finished his pretty speech, she had said, "Mr. Kroll's man measured the wood in March. He counted 209 trees fit for felling. There are 311. He has left out the whole of the eastern hanger, because there is no cart road into it, and your Grace's grandfather made one in '94 and let it grass over." A pause. "The offer is short by about a third, and I would not sell Farrow Wood at all, if you will forgive me. Sell the Ingoldsby cottages instead. They cost more to keep than they ever bring, and nobody's grandchildren will want oak that isn't there." Kroll had gone red. Liesl had raised an eyebrow at Thaddeus in that way, the way that says, "Is this what one is now obliged to endure?" And Thaddeus, 37 years old, master of 9,000 acres and small that afternoon, in a way he had not known he could be, had said the thing about the 100. He told himself for 2 days that she would not go. On Thursday morning her trunk was in the hall. It was a small trunk, corded, with a black tin box on top of it, and Constance Reeve was standing beside it in her cloak and bonnet with her gloves already on. Fen the butler was standing well back against the wall with the face of a man at a hanging. Thaddeus came down the stairs faster than a duke ought and put himself between her and the door. "You are not going," he said. "I gave 3 days' notice, your grace, which is more than the terms require and less than I should have liked. The keys are on the hall table, labelled. The rent book is written up to Mike Elmer's. Mrs. Farrow knows about the coal list. I have left a note about the Ingoldsby drains, which will not wait past November. Miss Reeve," he had never once used her given name and did not do so now, which he would think about later, "you are being absurd." I spoke in temper. "You will oblige me by taking off your bonnet and returning to your duties, and I will double your wages from Lady Day." Something crossed her face then. Not anger. He would have preferred anger. "You have just done it again," Constance said quietly. "Done what?" "Named a price." She picked up the tin box. "My father was steward here 19 years, your grace. When he died there was no money to bring another man in, so I did his work on my own, and I have done it 4 years. And in 4 years you have never once looked at the rent book. Not once. You signed at the bottom where I put my finger. Yesterday I told you the truth about your own timber, in front of a stranger, 'cause that is what my father was paid for and what I was not, and you told me there were 100 of me." Her chin was perfectly level. "There may well be. But you will not find out by offering me more money, and I find I do not want to be here on the day you go looking. Where will you go? That is not your grace's concern." "Constance, please move," she said, "or I shall have to ask the footman to, and it will be worse for both of us." Thaddeus, Duke of Orleston, stood in the doorway of his own house with his hand flat against the frame, and could not think of a single sentence in the English language that would keep her. He moved. She went out past him, and down the steps, and Fen carried the trunk to the carrier's cart at the lodge gate, and Thaddeus stood at the long window of the hall and watched the cart go all the way down the avenue and out of sight, which took 11 minutes, and he did not move for any of them. He advertised on the Monday. Mrs. Halliwell came first, from an excellent house in Yorkshire, with 3 characters and a manner like a frost. She lasted 19 days. She could not read the rent book, because the rent book had been kept for 19 years in Jonas Reeve's private shorthand and continued for 4 more in his daughter's, and there was no key to it anywhere on the estate, Mrs. Peake came second and was very willing and knew nothing about drains. Miss Yardley came third and stayed a fortnight and left in tears, having been asked by a tenant's wife at the door whether Miss Reeve was ever coming back, and having had to say she did not know. Thaddeus had said 100. He had got through 3 by the middle of November, and the roof was still going, and the Inglesby drains had failed exactly when he had been told they would fail, and the house had gone strange. That was the thing he could not explain to Liesl, who came at Christmas and found him poor company. The house was quieter and colder, and the flowers in the hall were bought ones now, and nobody put a lamp in the passage window on foggy nights for the men coming up from the home farm, and Thaddeus had never known anybody had. He found out about the timber in January. He had farrow wood measured himself by a stranger from Shrewsbury who had never heard of any of them, and the stranger came back with 314 trees fit for felling and an opinion about the eastern hanger. Thaddeus sat with that paper for a long time. Then he wrote to a man he trusted in the city and asked a question about Mr. Kroll, and got an answer 9 days later that included the words commission and Mr. Liesl in the same sentence, and he wrote to his cousin that afternoon and did not invite him again. He had been within a signature of losing £1,600 and a wood his grandfather planted. The only person who had stood between him and it had been standing at the end of his desk in a grey stuff gown, and he had told her there were 100 of her. He went through the rent book that night with a candle and a great deal of humility, and by 3 in the morning he had cracked perhaps a third of the shorthand, and had also found something else. Against the name Pride in the 3rd column, there was a small penciled mark in the margin, a plain letter C, repeated every quarter day for 2 years. He asked Fen about in the morning. Fen, who was 70 and had nothing left to lose, said, "That will be Miss Reeve, your Grace." The widow Pride is rent. She paid it out of her own wages when the old woman's son died, and asked me not to mention it, and I have not, and I am glad to be asked at last. Thaddeus put the book down and went and stood at the window for some while. He found her in the 3rd week of February. It had taken a letter to her aunt, and a letter to the rector at Ledbury, and finally a piece of information from the widow Pride herself, who looked him in the eye on her own doorstep and made him ask twice. Messrs. Pallant & Son, corn factors, occupied a narrow brick counting house in Wexbridge with a coal fire, a rail across the middle, and 4 high desks. At the furthest of them, on a tall stool, with an apron over her sleeves and a green shade above the lamp, sat Constance Reeve, working down a column of figures with a steel pen, and she did not look up when the bell went because she was carrying a total. Thaddeus took off his hat and waited. Old Mr. Pallant came bustling and began to bow, and Thaddeus said, "I am here to speak to your clerk, sir, if she can be spared 10 minutes." And Mr. Pallant said Miss Reeve was the best set of hands in the county and could be spared for as long as his Grace liked, and Thaddeus said, "Yes." I know, and something in the way he said it made the old man take his hat and go out into the street. She came down off the stool. She did not off the apron. "Your Grace, Miss Reeve," he found his mouth was dry. "I have had farrow wood measured, 314. Bill's man was short by a third, and my cousin was taking a commission on the difference, and if you had held your tongue in October I should have been robbed of £1,600 and a wood that took 80 years to grow. I am glad it was measured." "That is not what I came to say." He turned the hat over in his hands. "I have hired 3 housekeepers since Michaelmas. Mrs. Halliwell, Mrs. Peake, and Miss Yardley. They were all perfectly respectable women, and none of them could read your father's book. And none of them knew that the lamp goes in the passage window on foggy nights, and none of them had ever paid a widow's rent out of their own wages for 2 years and asked the butler to say nothing about it." He looked up. "I said I could hire 100 like you. I have now tried, in earnest, at considerable expense, and I am obliged to report the result. There are not 100 like you. There is not one." Constance Reeves stood very still behind the rail. "You have come to offer me my place back." "No." "Then what have you come for?" "To ask you to marry me," said the Duke of Orleston, and to be told, quite properly, to go to the devil. The counting-house clock ticked 11 times before she spoke, and if I had been wrong about the timber, she said, If Kroll's man had been honest, and there had been 209 trees and I had cost you £4,000 out of pure arrogance, would you be standing in Mr. Pallant's counting house in February? Yes. Why? Because I did not come about the timber. Thaddeus set the hat down on the rail, which put his hands out of business, and made himself say it plainly, which he had never done in his life. I have had 4 years of a woman in a grey gown standing at the end of my desk telling me the truth, and I took it the way I take the post, every day, without looking up, as though it came from nowhere. And when she finally said something I did not wish to hear in front of a stranger, I made her cheep out loud, to spare my own vanity. I have thought about that sentence every day since the 6th of October. It is the worst thing I have ever done, and it took me 11 words. He came to the rail. I am not offering you wages. I am not offering you a place. I have had the stewardship of Orleston drawn up in your own name, Reeve, as it was for 19 years, with the agency, the rent book, the timber and the drains, and it is yours whether you ever speak to me again or not. The papers are with Pallant, and I will not take them back. That is the debt. He drew breath. The other thing is mine, and I have no right to it at all, and I am asking anyway. Constance, come home and marry me. Not because I cannot manage the estate without you, though I plainly cannot. Because the house has been cold since October, and it is not the roof. She put her hand up over her mouth. You never once said my name, she said, from behind it. I was afraid of it, Thaddeus said. I have been afraid of it for 2 years. It seemed to me that if I said it I should have to know what I meant, and a duke does not marry his housekeeper, and I am ashamed to tell you how much of my life I have arranged around that sentence. Constance came round the end of the rail in her apron, with ink on her fingers. You are a very great fool, your grace, she said unsteadily. I am aware. And I have been in love with you since the winter my father died, and you carried his coffin yourself in the snow, when you did not have to, and never mentioned it after. Thaddeus Orleston shut his eyes. Then he took her inky hands in both of his, and stood there in a corn factor's counting house with the coal fire spitting and the clerks pretending furiously to work, and did not let go for a considerable time. They were married at Orleston in April, in the parish church, and the tenants filled it and stood 3 deep at the door, and the widow Pride was given a seat at the front and wept through the whole of it. The Duchess of Orleston kept the stewardship. Her name is on the agency papers and on the door of the estate room, and for the next 30 years there was not a beast bought, or a field drained, or a tree felled on that ground without her hand in the book. Farrow Wood was never sold. The Ingoldsby cottages went, and the roof lead was made good, and the money came out precisely where she had said it would. Mr. Liesel wrote twice. Nay, the letter was answered, and every quarter day, when the rents were done and the lamp lit and the long estate table cleared, the Duke of Orleston would come and stand at the end of it in the old way, waiting to be told the truth about something, the drains, the price of oats himself, and his wife would look up over the top of the book, and he would think every single time of 11 words spoken in October, and be glad beyond speech that she had not stayed to prove them,